September 27th, 1969, 6:30 p.m. The shores of Lake Berryessa, California. A young couple lies on a blanket enjoying the sunset. Brian Hartnell, 20, and Cecilia Shepard, 22. College students, in love, having a peaceful picnic by the water. Then they see him, a man, walking toward them from the trees, and something's wrong, very wrong. He's wearing a costume, a black executioner's hood with a white symbol on the chest, a circle with a cross through it. In his hands, a gun, pointed directly at them. Brian tries to stay calm, asks what he wants. Money? The car keys? They'll give him anything. Just don't hurt them. And the man speaks. His voice is calm, almost friendly. He says he's an escaped convict, just needs their car, needs to get to Mexico. If they cooperate, nobody gets hurt. Brian believes him, starts to relax. This is just a robbery. They'll give him what he wants and he'll leave. But then the man pulls out a rope, tells Brian to tie up Cecilia. And Brian does, hands shaking, trying to keep her calm, telling her it'll be okay. The man will take the car and leave and they'll be fine. Then the man tells Cecilia to tie up Brian. She does. Both of them are now bound, helpless, lying face down on the blanket. And Brian is still trying to stay calm, still thinking this is just a robbery, still believing the lie about Mexico. And then, wait, stop right there. Before we see what happens next, before we finish this scene, before we watch what this man does to two helpless people on a beach in California, you need to understand something. You think you know who the Zodiac Killer is. You've seen the movie, you've read the theories, you know about Arthur Lee Allen, about the suspects, about the ciphers, about the taunting letters to the newspapers. You think you understand this case. You don't, not even close. Because almost everything you believe about the Zodiac Killer is wrong. The movies lied to you. The documentaries missed the point. The online theories are chasing ghosts. And the real story? The real story is so much darker, so much stranger, and so much more frustrating than anything Hollywood could create. The Zodiac Killer claimed to have murdered 37 people. The police confirmed 5 deaths. But the real number? It's probably somewhere in between, and we'll never know for sure. Because the Zodiac didn't just kill people. He played games. He lied. He exaggerated. He wanted you confused, wanted you scared, wanted you obsessed, and it worked. 55 years later, we're still talking about him, still trying to solve his ciphers, still arguing about suspects, still searching for answers that might not exist. Here's what you're going to learn in the next 70 minutes. The real victims, not just names and dates, but people, their last moments, what they said, what they felt, the survivors who can still describe his voice, the phone calls he made, the letters he sent, the ciphers that took 50 years to crack, and what they actually said. You're going to learn why Arthur Lee Allen, the most famous suspect, probably isn't the Zodiac, why the police had the killer's DNA, fingerprints, and handwriting and still couldn't catch him, why he suddenly stopped killing, or did he, and why, after decades of investigation, we might actually know who he was but can never prove it. And we're going to go back to that beach, to Brian and Cecilia, to September 27th, 1969. And you're going to understand exactly what happened and why one of them survived to tell the story while the other didn't, and what that survivor said about the man in the executioner's hood that changes everything. This is the Zodiac Killer, the real story, not the movie, not the myth, the truth. And I promise you, by the end of this, you'll never look at those cipher letters the same way again. Welcome to Mind Vale. let's hunt a killer. Before we talk about the murders, before we decode the ciphers, before we examine the suspects, we need to understand something crucial. The Zodiac Killer wasn't the first, wasn't even particularly original, but he was something new, something that would change American crime forever. He was a showman, a performer, a killer who understood media, who knew that in 1960s America, with television and newspapers and a public hungry for sensational stories, murder could make you famous, could make you powerful, could make you immortal. And he was right. We're still talking about him, still obsessed, still trying to catch a ghost. That's his real victory, not the murders, the fame, the legend, the fact that his symbol, that circle with a cross, is instantly recognizable 55 years later. But let's start at the beginning, because the Zodiac didn't appear fully formed. He started small, testing, learning, perfecting his craft, and his first known victims, they had no idea they were about to become part of history. December 20th, 1968. Berryessa, California, just before Christmas. A small town north of San Francisco. Lake Herman Road, a lover's lane, the kind of place teenagers go to park and make out and pretend they're alone in the world. David Faraday, 17 years old, high school student. First date with Betty Lou Jensen, 16. They're in David's car, a brown Rambler, parked at a turnout overlooking the lake. It's cold, dark. They're talking, laughing, getting to know each other, just two kids on a date. And then headlights. Another car pulls up behind them, maybe 10 feet away, stops, waits. David probably thinks it's nothing, a cop checking on them, or another couple looking for a place to park. He's not worried, not yet. The other car sits there, engine running, headlights on, minutes pass. David starts to get uncomfortable. Who just sits there? What do they want? He tells Betty Lou, maybe they should leave, starts the engine, and that's when the other car's door opens. A man gets out, walks toward them, and David sees the gun, tries to drive away, but he's too slow. The man reaches the passenger side, raises the gun, and shoots Betty Lou through the window. Then he walks around to the driver's side. David tries to get out, to run, to fight, but the man shoots him in the head, point blank. David drops, dead before he hits the ground. Betty Lou somehow survives the first shot, gets out of the car, starts running, stumbling, terrified, and the man chases her, shoots her 4 more times in the back. She falls 28 feet from the car and dies there on Lake Herman Road. 5 bullet wounds, 16 years old. First date, never made it home. A passing driver finds them around 11 p.m. David's body by the car. Betty Lou's in the road, blood everywhere. The police arrive, process the scene, and they have nothing, no witnesses, no motive, no suspects. Random murder, wrong place, wrong time. They'll never solve it, except it's not random, and this isn't the last time, because somewhere in the darkness, the killer is already planning his next move, already thinking about how to do it better, how to make it more dramatic, more memorable, more his. But here's what you need to understand. This first murder, it's almost normal. For a serial killer, drive up, shoot, leave, no games, no letters, no ciphers, no taunts, just violence, quick, brutal, efficient. The showman hasn't been born yet. That comes later. That comes after the killer realizes something important. Murder is easy, but fame? Fame requires performance, requires publicity, requires making people pay attention, and he's about to become very, very good at that. July 4th, 1969. 6 months later, Independence Day, Blue Rock Springs Park, Vallejo, California. Just 4 miles from the first murder. Another lover's lane, another couple, another night. Darlene Farron, 22 years old, married, mother of a young daughter, working as a waitress, and Michael Majot, 19. They're friends. Maybe more. It's complicated. They're parked in Darlene's car, a brown Corvair, talking, listening to music, enjoying the holiday. Around midnight, a car pulls into the parking lot. White. Maybe a Falcon or a Mustang. Pulls up next to them, sits there, engine running, and Michael gets nervous. Tells Darlene maybe they should leave. Something feels wrong. But before they can move, the car drives away, leaves the parking lot. Michael relaxes. False alarm. Just someone turning around. Nothing to worry about. And then 5 minutes later, the car comes back. Pulls up behind them this time. Maybe 8 feet away, high beams on, blinding, and Michael knows. Something is very wrong. A man gets out, walks toward them, and Michael sees the flashlight. Thinks maybe it's a cop, security guard, someone checking on them. But then he sees the gun, a 9mm pistol. Raises his hands, tries to say something, and the man opens fire. Through the window, rapid fire, 9 shots. Michael is hit multiple times, shoulder, neck, jaw. Darlene is hit 5 times, back, arms, neck. The man walks back to his car, gets in, starts to drive away, and Michael, bleeding in agony, thinks it's over. They survived. Help will come. They'll be okay. And then the car stops, backs up. The man gets out again, walks back to them, and shoots them both 2 more times, making sure, making certain, and then he leaves, for real this time, drives away into the night. Michael survives, barely. Multiple surgeries, months of recovery, permanent damage, but alive. Darlene dies at the hospital, 22 years old, leaving behind a husband and a little girl who will grow up without her mother. And the police? They have a description now. From Michael, white male, stocky build, maybe 5 feet 8 inches, round face, light brown hair. But here's where it gets interesting, where the Zodiac is born. Because 3 days later, on July 7th, the Vallejo Police Department receives a phone call. Around 12:40 a.m., a man's voice, calm, matter of fact, and he says, "I want to report a double murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to the public park, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." And he hangs up. Before they can trace the call, before they can ask questions. But they heard enough. The voice, the details, the confession, and that last line. "I also killed those kids last year." He's talking about David and Betty Lou, the Lake Herman Road murders. This isn't a random killing. This is the same person, and he's calling to take credit, to make sure the police know, to start the game. But that's not all, because on August 1st, 1969, 3 newspapers in the San Francisco Bay Area received letters: the San Francisco Chronicle, the Vallejo Times-Herald, and the San Francisco Examiner. And each letter is almost identical, claiming responsibility for the murders, providing details only the killer would know, and demanding something. Publish this letter on the front page, or I will kill again. I will go on a kill rampage this weekend. I will cruise around and kill people who are alone at night. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow or stop my collecting of slaves for the afterlife. Slaves for the afterlife. He believes, or wants you to believe, that everyone he kills becomes his slave in the next life. That murder is recruitment, that he's building an army of the dead to serve him for eternity. It's grandiose, delusional, terrifying, and it works. The newspapers publish the letters, front page, exactly as demanded. But wait, there's more, because each letter also contains something else. 1/3 of a cipher, a coded message. 408 symbols total, split into 3 parts, one for each newspaper. And the killer says if the newspapers publish the ciphers, he will tell them who he is, where he is, his identity, everything. It's a game, a puzzle, a challenge. Solve this and you catch me, if you can. And the public goes crazy, everyone trying to decode it, amateur sleuths, professional cryptographers, the FBI, everyone. Because this isn't just a murder case anymore. This is a mystery, a riddle, a story. And America loves a good story. And here's where the Zodiac makes his mistake, his first mistake. Because on August 8th, 1969, 1 week after the ciphers are published, a school teacher named Donald Hardin and his wife Betty crack it. They solve the 408-character cipher. And what does it say? I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and all the people I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife. That's it. That's the message. No identity, no location, no real information, just a confession, a taunt, a promise of more violence, and a bizarre belief system that sounds like it came from a pulp fiction novel. The cipher was never about revealing himself. It was about control, about making the newspapers dance, about proving he was smarter than everyone else. And it worked. The Zodiac is now famous, national news. Everyone knows about the cipher killer, the man who taunts the police, who writes letters, who plays games, and he loves it, loves the attention, the fear, the power, and he's just getting started. But remember that couple at Lake Berryessa, Brian and Cecilia, tied up on a blanket by the water? The man in the executioner's hood standing over them with a knife. We're about to go back there because that attack happens 3 weeks after the cipher is solved. And it's different, very different, because the Zodiac is evolving, getting bolder, more theatrical, more sadistic. And what he does to them is going to haunt one of the survivors for the rest of their life. September 27th, 1969, Lake Berryessa. Let's finish the scene. Brian and Cecilia are tied up, face down, helpless, and the man in the executioner's hood is standing over them. Brian is still trying to reason with him, still trying to believe this is just a robbery, that the man will take what he wants and leave, that they'll be okay. And then the man puts away his gun and pulls out a knife, a large knife, maybe a foot long. And Brian realizes this was never about robbery. This was never about the car. This was always about something else, something much worse. The man starts stabbing, Cecilia first, her back, her shoulders, again and again. She's screaming. Brian is screaming, begging him to stop, promising anything, money, silence, whatever he wants. And the man doesn't speak, doesn't explain, just keeps stabbing, methodically, deliberately, like he's practicing, like this is routine. Cecilia stops screaming, goes silent, and the man turns to Brian, starts stabbing him 6 times, back, shoulders, kidney, Brian pretends to be dead, goes limp, stops moving, hoping the man will think he succeeded, will leave them alone. And it works. The man stops, stands up, and walks away. Brian lies there in agony, listening, waiting, and he hears the man doing something at Brian's car, writing something, and then footsteps, walking away, getting distant, and finally, silence. Brian manages to free himself, crawls to Cecilia. She's alive, barely, bleeding heavily. He tries to help her, to stop the bleeding, to keep her conscious. And he sees what the man wrote on his car door in black marker, a message, the circle cross symbol, and below it, Vallejo 12-2068, 7469, September 2769, 6:30, by knife. The dates, the Lake Herman Road murders, the Blue Rock Springs attack, and this one, today. He's taking credit, claiming his kills, marking his territory, and then Brian sees the last line, by knife, because this one was different, personal, close, not bullets from a distance, a knife, face to face, intimate, brutal. A fisherman finds them around 7:10 p.m., 40 minutes after the attack, calls for help. Brian is rushed to the hospital, survives, multiple stab wounds, but nothing fatal. He gives a detailed description, the hood, the symbol, the voice, everything. And the police think, finally, we have a survivor who can identify him, a witness who saw his costume, who heard his voice, who can help us catch him. But Cecilia? She dies 2 days later, September 29th, in the hospital, 22 years old, 10 stab wounds, massive internal damage. She held on as long as she could, fought, but it wasn't enough, and her death is counted as the Zodiac's third confirmed victim, though by now he's claiming much more, because on September 27th, the same day as the Lake Berryessa attack, the Zodiac calls the Napa Police Department. Around 7:40 p.m., just over an hour after stabbing Brian and Cecilia, and he reports the crime himself, gives them the location, tells them what he did, and adds, I'm the one who did that, confessing, taking credit, making sure the police know, making sure the newspapers know, making sure everyone knows. And here's what's chilling. The Zodiac could have killed them both easily. Brian was helpless. Cecilia was helpless. He had a knife. He had time. But he didn't finish them off, left them alive, or at least alive enough that Brian could survive. Why? Because he wanted a witness, wanted someone to describe the costume, the hood, the symbol, wanted the story told, wanted the fear to spread. This isn't about murder anymore. This is about theater, about creating a legend, about making sure that even if you survive, you'll never forget. You'll spend the rest of your life remembering the man in the executioner's hood, the calm voice, the methodical stabbing, the fact that he could have killed you but chose not to, left you alive to spread his story, to make him famous. And Brian Hartnell, he survived, lived a long life, got married, had a career, but he never forgot, gave hundreds of interviews, helped with investigations, tried to identify the Zodiac from suspects' voices, and never could, because memory is imperfect. Trauma distorts things, and 50 years later, that voice could belong to anyone or no one. But here's the thing that everyone misses. Brian described the Zodiac's voice as calm, almost monotone, not excited, not emotional, not angry, just calm. Like he was reading from a script, like this was routine, like he'd done it before and would do it again. And that detail, that might be the most important clue of all, because it suggests this wasn't his first time. The confidence, the control, The performance, this was practiced, rehearsed, perfected, which raises the question, how many times did he practice? How many victims before David and Betty Lou? How many murders that we don't know about, that weren't credited to the Zodiac, that he never claimed? And that's the nightmare that keeps investigators up at night. Because the confirmed victims, that might just be the ones he wanted you to know about. 2 weeks after Lake Berryessa, the Zodiac strikes again. October 11th, 1969, San Francisco. But this time, it's different, very different, because this time, the victim isn't a couple at a lover's lane, it's a single man in the city, working, and the attack happens in the middle of a populated area. This is evolution. This is the Zodiac getting bolder, more confident, more reckless, or more desperate. Hard to say which. Paul Stine, 29 years old, cab driver, working the night shift, picking up fares in San Francisco. It's around 9:30 p.m. when a man hails his cab at the intersection of Mason and Geary Streets. Well-dressed, calm, polite, asks to be taken to Washington and Maple Streets. About 10 minutes away, in the Presidio Heights neighborhood, a quiet residential area. Nothing unusual. Paul drives, makes small talk. The passenger is quiet but friendly. They arrive at the destination. Paul parks, turns to collect the fare, and the passenger shoots him in the head, point blank, with a 9mm pistol. Paul dies instantly, slumps forward, and the passenger does something new, something the Zodiac has never done before. He tears off a piece of Paul's shirt, a bloody piece of fabric, takes Paul's wallet and keys, and wipes down the cab interior, the steering wheel, the door handles, like he's trying to remove fingerprints, trying to be careful. But he's not careful enough, because across the street, 3 teenagers are watching from a window. They see the whole thing, the passenger leaning over, wiping something down, getting out, walking away. They call the police, give a description. White male, glasses, crew-cut hair, stocky build, around 5 feet 8 inches to 5 feet 10 inches. The police dispatch the call, but there's a miscommunication. The dispatcher says, black male suspect, and every patrol car in the area starts looking for a black man, while the real killer, a white man, walks right past 2 police officers just blocks from the crime scene. They see him, even make eye contact, but they're looking for someone else, and the Zodiac escapes. By the time the police realize the error, he's gone, disappeared into the night, but he left evidence, lots of evidence. Paul's bloody shirt piece, fingerprints on the cab, possibly DNA on the stamp of the letters he'll send later. Witnesses who saw his face, described his appearance. This should be solvable. This should be the break in the case. And yet, 3 days later, October 14th, the San Francisco Chronicle receives a letter, another Zodiac letter, and inside, a piece of Paul Stine's bloody shirt, proof that the writer is the killer. And the letter says, I am the murderer of the taxi driver over by Washington Street and Maple Street last night. To prove this, here is a blood-stained piece of his shirt. I am the same man who did in the people in the North Bay area. The SF police could have caught me last night if they had searched the park properly instead of holding road races with their motorcycles. He's mocking them, taunting them, explaining how he walked right past them, how they missed their chance. And he's threatening more, saying he'll move from shooting people to blowing up school buses, killing children, making his attacks more dramatic, more terrifying, more newsworthy. And the piece of shirt? The police confirm it matches Paul Stine's shirt. The blood type matches. The torn edge matches. This is real. This is the killer. And he's sending them evidence, not to help them, but to prove he's smarter, bolder, untouchable. This is the Zodiac at his peak. 4 confirmed murders, letters to newspapers, ciphers, physical evidence, witnesses, a partial fingerprint from the cab, and they still can't catch him. Every lead goes nowhere. Every suspect doesn't match. Every tip is a dead end, and the Zodiac knows it, and he's loving it. But here's the thing about Paul Stine's murder. It breaks the pattern. The other attacks were couples, isolated locations, lovers' lanes. This is a single man, in the city, a crime of opportunity, or something else. And the fact that he took the shirt piece, the wallet, that he wiped down the cab, that suggests planning, forethought. He knew he was going to send that letter, knew he needed proof, knew this murder would be different, and needed to cement his claim. And that's when it hits you. The Zodiac isn't improvising, he's following a plan. Each murder is different. Each one tests something new. Different weapon, different location, different victim type. He's experimenting, learning, refining, and every time the police fail to catch him, he gets bolder, more theatrical, more confident that he's invincible. But after Paul Stine, something changes. The Zodiac doesn't kill again, at least not that we know of, not that he claims. October 11th, 1969, that's his last confirmed murder, his last claimed victim. And for the next 4 years, he sends letters, he sends ciphers, he makes threats. But no more bodies, no more attacks. Why? Did he get scared? Did the police get too close? Did he move away? Get arrested for something else? Die? Or did he just keep killing and stop taking credit? Stop writing letters? Stop playing the game? Because serial killers don't usually just stop. They escalate until they're caught, killed, or incapacitated. So what happened to the Zodiac? Before we answer that question, we need to talk about the letters. Because after Paul Stine, the Zodiac sends dozens of letters. 2 newspapers, to lawyers, to private citizens, and each one reveals something about his psychology, his motives, his obsessions, and his lies. Because the Zodiac doesn't just kill, he performs, and his letters are the script. November 8th, 1969, less than a month after Paul Stine, the Zodiac sends a letter to the San Francisco Chronicle, 7 pages, his longest yet. And it's bizarre, rambling, filled with threats, boasts, and a new cipher. 340 characters, more complex than the first, and he claims that this cipher contains his identity, that if the police are smart enough, they can solve it and catch him. Spoiler alert, it takes 51 years to crack this cipher. 51 years. It's finally solved in December 2020 by a team of code breakers using modern computing. And what does it say? I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show, which brings up a point about me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner, because I now have enough slaves to work for me. That's it. No name, no location, no real information, just more taunts, more grandiose claims about the afterlife, more proof that the ciphers were never about revealing himself. They were about wasting everyone's time, about proving he was smarter, about controlling the narrative. But the letter also contains something new, a threat. He says he'll start targeting school buses, shooting out the tires, picking off the children as they run away, and he describes in detail how he'll do it, what modifications he'll make to his gun, how he'll choose his location. It's graphic, it's terrifying, and it's probably a lie, a way to escalate the fear, to make people think he's even more dangerous than he already is. And it works. School districts panic, increased security, police escorts for buses, parents keeping kids home. The entire Bay Area is terrified. And the Zodiac? He's loving it, because this is what he wants. Not more bodies, fear, control. The ability to make millions of people change their behavior with just a letter. That's real power. December 20th, 1969. 1-year anniversary of the Lake Herman Road murders. The Zodiac sends another letter with a new cipher and a message. He's claiming credit for 7 murders now, not 4, 7, which means he's killed 3 more people that the police don't know about. Or he's lying, exaggerating, trying to seem more prolific than he is. It's impossible to say which. The police investigate, look for unsolved murders that match his M.O., and there are candidates, possible Zodiac victims that were never confirmed. Sherry Jo Bates, murdered in 1966 in Riverside, stabbed repeatedly. The Zodiac sent letters claiming credit for her death 2 years later, but the evidence is weak. The connection is tenuous. Most investigators don't believe she was a Zodiac victim, but maybe, possibly, Kathleen Johns. In March 1970, she's driving with her infant daughter when a man in another car signals that her wheel is wobbling. She pulls over, he offers to help, tightens the lug nuts. She drives away, but the wheel falls off completely. The man returns, offers her a ride to a gas station. She accepts, and then he drives past every gas station, starts driving into remote areas, won't let her out, and Kathleen realizes this is a kidnapping. Possibly worse, she manages to escape, jumps from the car while it's slowing at an intersection, grabs her baby, runs into a field, hides. The man searches for her, can't find her, eventually leaves, and Kathleen later sees a wanted poster for the Zodiac. Says the sketch looks exactly like the man who tried to kidnap her, but there's no physical evidence, no proof, just her word. Is it him? Maybe, probably, but we'll never know for sure. And that's the frustration of the Zodiac case. Everything is maybe, everything is possibly. There are no definitive answers, just theories, suspects, hunches, and a killer who's still out there, or dead, or in prison for something else, and we may never know which. But let's talk about what we do know, the physical evidence. Because despite the Zodiac's claims of being a criminal genius, he left a lot behind, more than he probably realized. And if this case is ever solved definitively, it'll be because of this evidence. Fingerprints. The police lifted partial prints from several of the letters, and a palm print from Paul Stein's cab. Not enough for a definitive match with 1960s technology, but enough to rule out suspects. And they've ruled out hundreds, maybe thousands, of people who confessed, of tips, of theories, all eliminated because the fingerprints don't match. DNA. In the 1990s, forensic scientists extracted DNA from the saliva on the stamps and envelopes. Not a full profile. The samples are degraded, contaminated, but enough to get a partial match, enough to rule out some suspects, and enough that if a promising suspect emerges, they can test it, compare it, maybe solve the case. Handwriting. The Zodiac wrote dozens of letters, always in the same style, block print, deliberate, careful. Handwriting experts have analyzed it, created a profile, and when suspects emerge, they compare the handwriting, look for matches, And almost always they don't match, because the Zodiac was very careful about his handwriting, possibly disguised it, possibly used his non-dominant hand, making comparison difficult, if not impossible. Witnesses. Multiple people saw the Zodiac. Michael Mageau survived the Blue Rock Springs attack, described him in detail. Brian Hartnell heard his voice, saw his costume. The teenagers saw him after the Paul Stine murder. Several other people reported seeing suspicious men in the areas before or after the attacks. And they all say roughly the same thing. White male, stocky, 5 feet 8 inches to 5 feet 10 inches, round face, light brown hair, glasses sometimes, calm demeanor. That's your killer. That's the Zodiac. And it describes about 20 million American men in 1969, which is the problem. The description is too generic, too common. It rules out some suspects, but not enough. And memories fade. Trauma distorts. 55 years later, those witnesses aren't reliable anymore. And the Zodiac knew that time was his ally, that every year that passed made the case harder to solve. But here's what's interesting. In 2018, forensic genealogy became a thing. The Golden State Killer was caught using DNA in family tree databases. And suddenly, every cold case in America seemed solvable. Build a family tree from the DNA, narrow down the suspects, find relatives, work backwards. It's revolutionary. And the Zodiac case? It should be solvable this way. Should be. Except the DNA from the Zodiac letters is degraded, partial, possibly contaminated. Multiple handlers touched the letters before they understood the importance of DNA evidence. And when scientists tried to build a profile, they got multiple matches, conflicting results, false positives. It's possible the DNA isn't even from the Zodiac. Could be from a postal worker, a newspaper editor, a police officer, anyone who handled the letters. So the forensic genealogy approach? It's promising, but not definitive. Several teams have tried. Several family trees have been built. Several suspects have been identified, but none of them have been confirmed. None of them match all the evidence. And the case remains unsolved, which brings us to the suspects. Because over the past 55 years, thousands of people have been named as possible Zodiacs. Confessions, tips, theories, online sleuths, amateur detectives, professional investigators. Everyone has a suspect. Everyone is convinced they've solved it, and they're almost all wrong. Let's start with the most famous, Arthur Lee Allen. If you've seen the movie Zodiac, you know this name. He's the primary suspect, the man the police were convinced was the killer, the man who had connections to all the crime scenes, who owned the same rare weapons, who made suspicious statements, who matched the physical description, who seemed guilty of everything except the actual murders. Arthur Lee Allen was a school teacher, later worked at a hardware store, lived in Vallejo, close to the first 2 murder scenes, and he was investigated extensively for decades. The police searched his home multiple times, found weapons, knives, bombs, disturbing materials, but nothing that definitively linked him to the Zodiac murders. Witnesses looked at his photo, Michael Mageau, Brian Hartnell, the teenagers from the Paul Stine murder, and none of them could positively identify him. Some said maybe, some said no, none said yes, that's definitely him. Strike one. His handwriting was compared to the Zodiac letters, and it didn't match. The expert said no, not the same person. Strike two. His fingerprints were compared to the prints from Paul Stein's cab and the Zodiac letters. They didn't match. Strike 3. In 2002, after Allen died, they tested his DNA against the Zodiac DNA. It wasn't a match. Strike 4. By every objective measure, Arthur Lee Allen was not the Zodiac Killer, and yet people still believe he was, because he seemed guilty, because he was weird, because he had the right kind of personality, the right kind of pathology. But seeming guilty and being guilty are different things. And Arthur Lee Allen, he was a lot of terrible things, but he probably wasn't the Zodiac. So who else? There are dozens of other suspects, some more plausible than others. Let's talk about a few. Richard Gaikowski, journalist who worked for a counterculture newspaper in San Francisco, had access to printing equipment, could have created the cipher letters. His handwriting allegedly matched. His voice allegedly matched when Brian Hartnell heard a recording. But again, no physical evidence, no fingerprints, no DNA, and he died in 2004 without ever being charged. Lawrence Kane had a history of violence against women, lived in the Bay Area, allegedly knew one of the victims, and his appearance allegedly matched the composite sketch. But the same problems. No physical evidence, no definitive proof. And he died in 2010. Earl Van Best Jr. His son, Gary Stewart, wrote a book claiming his father was the Zodiac, presented circumstantial evidence, similarities in handwriting, possible connections to the victims. But again, no physical evidence, and most investigators dismiss this theory entirely. Ross Sullivan, a library worker who knew one of the possible Zodiac victims, Cherry Joe Bates, had behavioral problems, fit the physical description, but died in the 1970s before he could be properly investigated, and again, no physical evidence. Are you seeing the pattern? Dozens of suspects, hundreds of theories, and none of them stick. Because without physical evidence that definitively links someone to the crimes, it's all speculation, guesswork, confirmation bias, people seeing what they want to see. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The Zodiac probably wasn't anyone famous, probably wasn't anyone you've heard of. He was probably just some guy, some nobody who killed a few people, wrote some letters, and either died, moved away, or got arrested for something else. And we'll never know his name, because he won. He got away with it, and 55 years later, we're still chasing ghosts. But wait, I promised you answers, or at least better questions. So let's talk about the real mysteries, the things that don't make sense, the contradictions, the lies, the parts of the story that everyone ignores because they don't fit the narrative. First mystery: why did the Zodiac stop killing? After Paul Stein in October 1969, there are no more confirmed murders. He sends letters for years, until 1974. But no bodies, no attacks. Why? Serial killers don't just stop. They escalate. They get caught, killed, or incapacitated. So what happened? Theory 1, he died. Car accident, heart attack, suicide, something that removed him from the equation before he could kill again. Possible, but unsatisfying. And it doesn't explain why he kept sending letters. Theory 2, he was arrested for something else, put in prison for an unrelated crime, and couldn't kill anymore because he was locked up. This is actually pretty plausible. Many serial killers have criminal records, get arrested for minor stuff, and while they're in jail, their killing spree ends, and no one connects the dots. Theory 3, He moved away, left the Bay Area, started a new life somewhere else, and maybe kept killing but stopped taking credit, stopped writing letters, stopped being the Zodiac, because the game wasn't fun anymore or because he was afraid of getting caught. Theory 4. He didn't stop. He kept killing. But the murders weren't connected to the Zodiac because he changed his M.O., his victim selection, his methods, and the police never realized it was the same person. This is the nightmare scenario, that the Zodiac claimed 7 murders. The police confirmed 5, but the real number could be 30, 40, 50, and we'll never know. Second mystery, why those victims? David and Betty Lou, Darlene and Michael, Cecilia and Brian, Paul Stein. What connected them? Was it random, or was there a pattern, a selection criteria? Because if you look closely, there are some weird coincidences. Darlene Ferrin allegedly knew someone who harassed her, followed her, made her uncomfortable. Several witnesses said she seemed afraid of someone in the weeks before her death. Was it the Zodiac? Did he know her, stalk her, or is that just coincidence? Sherry Jo Bates, the possible Zodiac victim from 1966, received a letter before her death, a creepy letter, suggesting someone was watching her. And after her death, the police and newspapers received letters taking credit, saying she had to die. There will be more. Was it the Zodiac, or a copycat, or unrelated? And Paul Stein. Why a cab driver? Why that specific cab? Did the Zodiac choose him randomly? Or was Paul targeted for a reason? Did they know each other? Have some connection? We don't know. And that's the problem. There's no clear pattern, no obvious connection, which suggests randomness, or a pattern so subtle we can't see it. Third mystery, the ciphers. Why did he send them? What was the point? If they don't reveal his identity, if they're just taunts and gibberish, why bother? Why spend hours creating complex codes if the message is just, "I like killing people"? Unless, and this is speculation, unless the ciphers weren't for the police, they were for someone else, another person, a partner, a friend, someone who knew the key, who could read the real message hidden inside, and everyone else was just seeing the surface level. The fake message, the distraction. Is there evidence for this? Not really, but it would explain why the Zodiac spent so much time on ciphers that revealed nothing useful, why he kept sending them even after they were solved, why he seemed to be communicating something important even when the decoded message was trivial. Or maybe he was just messing with everyone, wasting police resources, watching them spend thousands of hours trying to decode messages that meant nothing, because that's power too, making people dance, making them think there's a pattern when there isn't, making them believe you're a genius when really you're just cruel. Fourth mystery, the phone calls. The Zodiac called the police several times after the Blue Rock Springs attack, after Lake Berryessa, and possibly other times. But the calls were always short, untraceable, from payphones. Why risk it? Why call at all? The letters were safer, no voice, no chance of being recognized. So why call? Because he wanted them to hear his voice, wanted the human connection, the intimacy. Writing letters is distant, abstract. But a phone call? That's real, that's immediate. That's him and the police talking, connecting, even if just for 30 seconds. And maybe that was the point. Maybe the Zodiac was lonely, desperate for connection, and the only way he could connect was through violence and taunts. That's the psychological profile, by the way. The The Zodiac was probably an intelligent but socially isolated man, unable to form normal relationships, possibly sexually dysfunctional, felt inadequate, powerless, and killing gave him power, made him feel important, made him feel seen. And the letters and ciphers? They were his way of saying, I exist, I matter, pay attention to me. Pathetic when you think about it. All that violence, all those lives destroyed, all that fear, just so some nobody could feel important for a few years, just so he could read about himself in the newspaper, just so he could believe he was special. Fifth mystery, why did the letters stop? The last confirmed Zodiac letter is from January 1974, 5 years after the murders, and then nothing. No more letters, no more ciphers, no more threats, just silence. Why? Same theories as why the killing stopped. Death, incarceration, relocation, or maybe he just got bored. The game wasn't fun anymore. The newspapers stopped printing his letters. The police stopped responding. The public stopped caring. And without the attention, the adulation, the fear, what was the point? So he stopped, went back to being nobody, and disappeared. But here's the thing that keeps investigators up at night. What if he didn't disappear? What if he's still alive? He'd be in his 70s or 80s now. Could be living anywhere. Could be your neighbor, your coworker, your grandfather, just some old man with a secret, a past that no one knows about, murders that were never solved, and a legend that will outlive him. Because that's the real victory, not the murders, the legend, the fact that 55 years later, we're still talking about him, still trying to solve his ciphers, still arguing about suspects, still searching for answers. He's immortal now, not in the afterlife with his slave army, but in pop culture, in true crime documentaries, in movies and books and YouTube videos. He wanted to be famous, and he succeeded forever. Let me tell you what I think happened. This is speculation, but it's informed speculation based on the evidence we have. I think the Zodiac was a young man in 1968, maybe late 20s, early 30s, had some military experience, or at least weapons training, knew how to shoot, how to plan, how to evade, but he was also impulsive, reckless, the kind of person who craves attention but doesn't know how to get it through normal means. I think he killed David and Betty Lou on impulse, or near impulse. Maybe he'd been thinking about it, fantasizing, but that night he saw them and he acted, and it felt good, powerful, exciting, and he wanted more. I think he killed Darlene and Michael 6 months later because the first murders didn't get enough attention. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody cared. So he did it again, made it more dramatic, and this time he called the police, took credit, made sure people knew. I think the ciphers came next because he realized the murders alone weren't enough. He needed a gimmick, a hook, something that would make him stand out from every other killer. And ciphers were perfect, mysterious, intellectual. They made him seem smart, made the case seem solvable, made people obsessed. I think Lake Berryessa happened because he wanted to try something different, test a new method. The executioner costume was theatrical, dramatic, terrifying, and stabbing was more intimate than shooting, more personal. He wanted to see how it felt, how they reacted, how he felt. It was research, practice, evolution. I think Paul Stine died because the Zodiac was getting desperate. The attention was fading. The newspapers weren't covering him as much, so he killed again. In the city this time, more risk, more exposure, And he took the shirt piece to prove it was him, to reclaim his fame, to remind everyone he was still here, still dangerous, still relevant. And then I think something happened. Between October 1969 and early 1974. Something that stopped him, not permanently at first. He kept writing letters, kept sending threats, but the killing stopped. Maybe he had a close call. Maybe the police got too close. Maybe someone he knew started to suspect. Maybe he moved for work. Maybe he got married, had kids, started a life that killing would jeopardize, and slowly, over those 5 years, the thrill faded. The need for attention diminished. The risk outweighed the reward. And he stopped, completely, became a regular person, or as regular as someone with his history could be. And he watched from the sidelines as investigators chased ghosts, as suspects were named and cleared, as his legend grew. And he smiled, because he got away with it, and they'd never figure it out. That's my theory. And it's probably wrong, but it fits the evidence better than most of the elaborate conspiracies. Better than the idea that he was some criminal mastermind with a grand plan. He wasn't. He was just some guy, some damaged, attention-seeking guy who killed a few people, wrote some letters, and disappeared into obscurity. And we spent 55 years making him more important than he ever was. So where does that leave us? With an unsolved case, with families who never got justice, with victims who deserve to be remembered for more than being part of the Zodiac story. David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Ferrin, Cecilia Shepard, Paul Stein. They were people with lives, with dreams, with families who loved them. And they died because some nobody wanted to be famous. And they did make him famous. That's the tragedy. That's the injustice. That we remember the killer's name, or at least his pseudonym. But most people can't name the victims. We've given him exactly what he wanted: immortality, legend, power, while the people he murdered are footnotes in his story. But here's the thing. The case isn't closed, not officially. The FBI still accepts tips. DNA technology improves every year. Forensic genealogy gets better. Witnesses' memories are recorded. New evidence is re-examined. And every few years, a new suspect emerges. A new theory, a new angle. Will it ever be solved? Maybe. Probably not definitively, but maybe enough to satisfy. Maybe enough to say, this is probably him. This is probably what happened. And while we can't prove it in court, we can close the book knowing we got as close to the truth as possible. And if that day comes, if they announce they've identified the Zodiac through DNA or genealogy or some other method, what will we learn? That he was nobody important, nobody famous, just some guy who killed a few people 55 years ago and died in obscurity. And all the mythology, all the legend, all the fear, it was all based on a lie. The lie that the Zodiac was special, brilliant, untouchable. He wasn't. He was just a murderer who got lucky, who lived in an era before modern forensics, before DNA databases, before the internet connected every police department and made cooperation easy. He was caught in the sweet spot between investigative eras. Too late for the old methods to work, too early for the new methods to exist. And he slipped through the cracks. But that's over now. The sweet spot is gone. Modern technology would catch him in days, maybe hours. His DNA would be in a database. His face would be caught on traffic cameras. His phone would ping cell towers. His internet searches would be logged. There's no hiding anymore, no disappearing into the night. The era of the Zodiac is over, and thank God for that. So what's the takeaway? What do we learn from the Zodiac case? That evil is often banal, that killers are rarely the masterminds we make them out to be, that fame is a drug, and some people will do anything to get it, that unsolved cases haunt us because we hate uncertainty. We hate not knowing. We hate that someone could do something so terrible and just get away with it. But mostly, we learn that legends are dangerous, that by making killers famous, by turning them into cultural icons, by obsessing over their ciphers and their letters and their suspects, we're giving them exactly what they wanted. We're making them immortal. And we're forgetting the people who actually matter, the victims, the families, the communities that were terrorized. So remember the names: David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Ferrin, Michael Mageau, who survived, Cecilia Shepard, Brian Hartnell, who survived, Paul Stein. They're the story, not the Zodiac, not the ciphers, not the suspects. Them. And if we're going to spend 55 years obsessing over this case, the least we can do is remember who was hurt, who was lost, who deserves justice. The Zodiac Killer was active for less than a year, killed 5 confirmed victims, possibly more, sent letters for 5 years, and then disappeared. And we spent more than half a century making him famous, making him important, making him legendary. Maybe it's time to stop. Maybe it's time to let the legend die, to admit that he was just a killer, just a coward who attacked helpless people and bragged about it, just a nobody who wanted to be somebody and succeeded only because we let him. The circle cross symbol, the cipher letters, the phone calls, the threats, they're not genius, they're not art. They're not worthy of admiration or fascination. They're the desperate acts of a pathetic man who couldn't get attention any other way. And 55 years later, we're still giving it to him, still making him relevant, still keeping his legend alive. Maybe the best revenge, the best justice, would be to forget him, to focus on the victims, to tell their stories instead of his, to take away the one thing he wanted most: fame, immortality, significance. But we won't, because we can't help ourselves, because the mystery is too compelling, the legend too powerful, the ciphers too tempting. And somewhere, if he's still alive, the Zodiac is reading this, watching documentaries, following the case, seeing his symbol on t-shirts and tattoos and movie posters, and smiling, because he won, and we let him. That's the real story of the Zodiac Killer, not the murders, not the ciphers, not the suspects, but the fact that 55 years later, we still can't let him go. We still can't move on. We still can't admit that sometimes the bad guys get away with it. And all we're left with is questions and grief and a legend that will outlive us all. The Zodiac Killer. 5 confirmed victims, 37 claimed. Reality? Probably somewhere in between. Active 1968 to 1969. Letters until 1974. Never caught. Never identified with certainty. Never brought to justice. And that's how it ends, not with answers, with silence, with uncertainty, with the uncomfortable truth that some mysteries don't get solved, some killers don't get caught, and some legends never die. Remember the victims, question the legend, and maybe, just maybe, stop giving him what he wanted.